Hello. Thanks for being here. I would like to thank all the sponsors, especially the Labor Center, Ken Jacobs and his crew, Rebecca Graham, somewhere around here, who was very, very helpful. I know spring break is just over and your heads are probably a little bit fuzzy, you know, from all that swimming at the beaches and so. But I want to talk about some data, and I use Professor Saez's data all the time, but also kind of interweave that with, you know, the folklore of the American dream. These ideals, these tenets of the American dream are woven very tightly into the fabric of our lives. So I think it's very important to question, as my good friend Bruce Springsteen has recently, not really good friends, but I wish, but really kind of trying to take stock with what is the American dream, what is the ideal of the dream, and how measuring the distance between that dream and the reality, which is exactly what we're doing by looking over these long-term trends of data. So one of the first tenets, certainly, that we think, and again, this is just kind of loosely held ideals. Nobody has the same, you know, the same tenets of the American dream in their mind. I think for the first people, the immigrants, it was to get here and to kind of, so one generation, your children would do better than what you have done. But certainly, this idea of having, you know, a lot of people in the U.S., probably less so over the last few years than before, having this notion of great wealth, that anybody coming from anywhere, under any circumstances, can work hard and attain great wealth. And of course, that's just not true. We see this in a lot of the data. One study, for instance, that followed a generation of children who were born into the bottom fifth or the bottom quintile of family income, followed them over a generation to see where they were. And after that, about 43% of them were still in the bottom quintile as working adults. And only about 6% of them made it to the top. So we definitely have some movement. Some people do strike it rich, there's no doubt about it. But we have much less mobility in the US than you might think. Of course, for a lot of students here at the University of California at Berkeley, this great institution, this is what your ladder probably looks like. It looks pretty bright, it looks pretty straightforward. You're starting pretty high on the ladder. Of course, that briefcase there is full of a bunch of IOUs of student loans that might make it a little bit harder to get there. But of course, you know, this is the case for, you know, people who get to go to college. That certainly gives people, gives one a leg up. But of course, the ladder isn't the same for everyone, and it's certainly not the same over countries. We know that I think people are always shocked by this. This is one measure of intergenerational. This is the intergenerational elasticity of earnings for my econ friends, quant heads. But basically, all it's saying is the longer the bar, the more correlation between where a son ends up, or what a son ends up earning compared to what his father was earning. So there's less mobility the longer these bars are. And people are always kind of shocked that even just up north in Canada, there's a lot more mobility than there is here in the US. Of course, one reason for that is that the ladder in the U.S. is different than in a lot of these countries. It's much longer. There's a lot of people dangling off the bottom here in the U.S., and those at the top of the U.S., the ladder is way, way up there in the stratosphere. So basically, we have, if you want to be really rich, you probably want to be in the U.S. If you're not doing so well, you might want to be in one of these other countries that have better safety nets. So that brings me to more recent data, though. What has happened since the Great Recession? And basically, I see that there's a lot of people who thought they had a firm footing on the middle-class rung of the economic ladder, and they have been sliding and slipping and falling off, mostly due to the wealth that they have lost in the housing market, which is the most folks and typical people have, typical families in the U.S., most of their wealth is tied up in their houses, and that certainly has not turned itself around as of yet. And also that a lot of people lost their jobs and their incomes. And even those who have kept their incomes, they have really not been going anywhere. So this is this really makes you wonder about the second tenet, which is the meritocracy. I mean, how can it be that people who played by the rules, people who went to school, people who worked very hard, people who own their own homes, people who thought that they had it made just a few years ago, are now struggling to keep their heads and their houses above water? It just is a real indictment on the fact that we don't have the system based on merit that a lot of people think we do in the U.S. It's just not quite as strong as we might like it to be. And of course, for you students who are studying here, I'm sure you've studied all types of things. I think Santorum said something about this university the other day, and all you lefties out here, studying those things like race and class and gender. But I'm sure that you've seen that it does matter. Race, class, gender does matter. So let me give you just one chart that kind of shows this. This is simply a chart of its percentage of completing college. So these are all low-score individuals. These first three bars are all low-scoring individuals. These were on an 8th grade math test, and how these individuals, whether they completed college or not. And so the different colored bars are whether they come from a low income, a middle income, or a high income household. So the first thing you see is that from the high income household, even though they all scored low on the math test, had a greater probability of actually graduating from college. And what you see is this actually holds this kind of stepwise for low, middle, and high income families up the scale of scores. And I think the big takeaway here really is that if you have a wealthy kid who scores low on tests, the probability of receiving a college degree is the same as a really smart kid who comes from a low-income household. So again, this speaks against this idea that we have the meritocracy to the degree that many here think that we do. So class matters, where you start matters. We have what EPI calls inequality at the starting gate, which is why we don't really want equal outcomes in the U.S., but we do want people to have equal opportunities. So this brings me more to kind of a wider angle lens, the big picture of what has happened to workers over a long period of time. And what this shows, very importantly, is from 1947 to around the early 70s, you had productivity and average hourly wage and compensation that includes things like health care increasing at an equal clip. And that was really good for the economy. As the economy was expanding, businesses were becoming more profitable, productivity was increasing, and part of that increase in productivity was shared between the companies, between firms, and between workers. And that's how we get real gains in the real standards of living. This is one way that we think that happens. We have to have that kind of coupled indices of productivity and wages. But of course, that has completely broken down. And you have to ask yourself, well, I mean, what is it? Why, since the 1950s, are corporate profits now record-breaking at an all-time high? Well, the share going to wages of GDP is at an all-time low. I mean, did that just happen? Is this a natural outcome of the free market? And that's another tenet, or it seems to be, especially now with the political atmospheres going on, a lot of talk about the free market, market-based solutions, and then a lot of screaming about socialism on the other side. But the fact is that we have a mixed market. We've always had a mixed market. We have a lot of good markets that are capitalist, and they are free markets, and they run very efficiently. And we also have some markets that we try to run in the free market system, like healthcare, which isn't very amenable to such a market. And we have the system of a socialized system where we have unemployment insurance, because we, as the wealthiest nation in the world, think that we should take care of people who are down through no fault of their own through something like unemployment insurance or food stamps. Medicare, Medicaid. I mean, it's just silly to always be arguing something like the free market and anything else is socialism. And you can call it what you want, but we've always had these mixed markets, which I don't think gets talked about enough. So, but why this increase in inequality that we've just seen from Professor Saez? I mean, those who have benefited want us to believe that it's fair, it's just, and it's a natural outcome of the free market system. They want us to believe that. That's why I think there's always this rhetoric of socialism in the background, humming in the background, every time anybody questions the free market system. So this is not an outcome of the free market system. This is certainly an outcome of something like supply-side economics. And Ken and I were just talking, they're doubling down again. I mean, look at the Ryan budget, doubling down on supply-side economics. But of course, we're way beyond the doubling down. We're at a much bigger number after 30 years of this. And this big experiment has proven what the outcomes of the continuation of it and the ratcheting up of it would mean, that the rich people are going to get rich. And Americans don't begrudge wealth. I think we love that we have rich people in this country. We love that we have the opportunity, and maybe if we're lucky enough, we can become wealthy. But when the wealthy are taking, as we just saw, 90-some%, 95, 96% of the expansion, the economy that expanded in 2009, 2010, they grabbed all of those gains, the top 1%, while the rest of us are falling further and further behind. That says to me that the wealthy are becoming more wealthy at the expense of the rest of us. So, a rising tide lifting all boats, we all think that's great. And that also means that there's very wealthy people. But that's not what's happening. The amount of wealth that we have now is definitely working against our economy and working against, I think, a healthy democracy. So this is just this is a picture of wages, what I call wage inequality, and the continuation of it in California. And this is saying over a long period of time, these wages are indexed to 1979, and saying at all the different percentiles, how are people that are in those percentiles today doing compared to workers that were in those percentiles in 1979? And really, everybody under the 60th percentile and below are doing about the same or worse than workers in those percentiles back in 1979. And again, I put this so you can kind of see the widening wedge that we see at the top. And if I could break this out even further, like we did with the other data that we've just seen, the top 1% or the top 0.1%, it would look even worse. It would be much wider. So again, I think it's, this is a good reason why we have to question our system and our ideals. And I would just like to point out here that the only time that we had the rising tide lifting all boats was in the tight labor markets of the late 1990s. We see here increases at all levels, from the bottom through the middle through the top. And that is the second Fed mandate. The Fed has a dual mandate of price stability and full employment, but we rarely have full employment. And without full employment, our workers can't get anywhere, especially with what has happened to the union situation in our country. So, of course, one of the things that really cracks me up is that the powers that be, the people who have benefited from this system, many of them run for political offices. As they're running for political offices, and they're telling us at the same time, government is evil. Government is not your friend. Government cannot be part of the solution, as they know the game is played in government. They vie for positions in government. They lobby folks at government, where the financial industry spent something like $500 million just last year trying to lobby for against the financial reform. They know the way the game is played. And with a straight face, they tell us not to play it. And so this is what happens. I think we know that this vicious cycle has been in effect for the last 30 years or so, and it's been ratcheting up as of late. They know the way the game's played. And as long as they make us believe in this free market ideal and everybody gets what they deserve and this is their natural extensions, they know that they can keep ratcheting it up. And every time we try to do something for the good of the people, it's called socialism and deemed wrong. But for instance, there was no free market God that just came down from on high and said that we need to have this trajectory of top marginal tax rates. Well, now it could be that, you know, maybe it came through some signal from Ayn Rand or something up there. But, you know, this is policy. This is policy that has been bought and sold time after time through a long period of time by the people who want these policies that make them richer and then make them more powerful. And again, this is not some natural outcome of the free market, and I wish that we would talk more and more about that. So, you know, of course, when it got to the banks, they needed to be bailed out. Well, that wasn't the free market, was it? That wasn't the free market then. That had to be done. It was a crisis. We had to let that go. The Dow was down to about 7,000. Now it's over 13,000. CEO pay is back to being normal. Wall Street is buzzing. Profits are back. And we see as the economy expanding, even at the slow pace that it's expanding, they're taking all the goods. But when it came to Main Street, they decided, game over. They pivoted towards the deficit, that we didn't have to worry about jobs, which that means everything to people on Main Street, their jobs. So let me just leave you with this. This is simply job loss during recessions. So when we go into recession like the blue line, that is simply showing how much, and this was the worst recession in 1981 that we ever had since the Great Depression. We lost about 2.5% of all jobs. It took us 47 months to recoup those jobs, or 27 months to recoup those jobs. In the 2001 recession, for instance, we lost just 2.5% of all jobs. But this is just to give you a comparison of the worst time before this happened where we were. That was in this blue line. This is the USA, the United States today, and those stars tell you when the official recession were over. And to see that if the federal government needs to have aid to the states, this is where California is today. And the U.S. is down not just this 5 million jobs. We need 10 to 12 million jobs just to get back to where we were in 2007, 4 years ago when this started. We completely abandoned this recovery when it came to Main Street. And this is going to haunt us for a long, long time to come. It's going to be very hard to turn around any type of bad trends that have been happening when you have a labor market such as this. So I'll leave you with a quote from George Carlin, and this is great. If you go to YouTube, you can see him rant and raving on this, and I definitely would tell you to do so. But I think it's an imperative, and I think it's patriarchal. It's a patriotic if we question this system. And we question it over and over again and participate in it until we can mold this mixed system, this mixed free market and socialist type-based system. So we have a system that is more equitable in the long run for us all. Thank you.